It is the worst road disaster in Italy's history. The tragedy has left a deep scar on the nation and on the city of Genoa, despite an incredible feat of engineering that stands both as a monument to the catastrophe and a symbol of pride reborn. These images capture the last moments of the Morandi Bridge and of 43 people's lives. The brake lights of the vehicles on the bridge tell us there's a stoppage ahead. The traffic draws to a standstill, and the drivers realize what has just happened. The bridge has disappeared. A colossal disaster has occurred.
È una tragedia evitabile.
It was an avoidable tragedy, and that's why it's so painful, because they needn't have died that way. If I think of my nephew and niece, 12 and 14 years old, in the fullness of their lives, it's senseless.
Less than 2 years later, TV crews from all over the world have come to cover the opening of the new bridge over the Polcevera River. The new bridge has a name, Ponte Genova San Giorgio. The highest institutional figures of the Italian state are present, as is Renzo Piano, the bridge's architect. I hope that this bridge will be loved. It is not easy to be heir of tragedy. It is hard. So I hope it will be loved and adopted by the people and become rapidly part of their daily existence. This is what I hope.
The success in building the bridge is a symbol of how things can be done right, with quality, on budget, and above all, on time.
This is more than a bridge. It is the symbol of national pride, the sign of the rebirth of a city struck by a massive disaster. The story of fortitude under the most trying conditions. The new bridge is the nation's response to the disaster. It is the late morning of August the 14th, 2018. A massive rainstorm strikes the coastal motorway, as these images, filmed by a truck driver's phone, show. He is on his way to France. Gianluca Ardini was delivering furniture in his van. At the wheel, his friend and colleague Luigi Matti Altadonna.
That morning in particular, it was raining hard, I remember. My colleague and I got into my truck to do some deliveries. I worked in a company that sells home furniture, so we start our day of deliveries, and we were at Genoa Center, and to pass, I had to, of course, take Ponte Morandi. On days I did not work, I crossed that bridge twice a day. On the days that I worked, at least 4 or 5 times a day.
Genova Centro, diciamo. E per passare dovevo prendere per forza il Ponte Morandi.
A motorway CCTV camera is filming in the opposite direction, towards Genoa West, and picks up a green delivery truck and a grey Volkswagen Tiguan. Davide Cappello is aboard. I tried to slow down because I saw the tarmac in front of me begin to fall. I slammed on the brakes, hoping not to go down myself. But then I found myself flying down together with the whole bridge, with the front of my car pointing downwards. The camera records the last moments of the Morandi Bridge and in the lives of 43 people.
I was looking at the tablet, and I heard my colleague say, "What the hell is happening?" And like in a film, truly, the road opened up before us, and we go plummeting down.
Davide Capello survives, miraculously, but is trapped in his car, lodged in an empty space inside the bridge structure. Luigi dies in the cab of his van, and Gianluca Ardini has to wait 4 hours before he can be pulled from the wreckage by the fire brigade. Richard Bordoni is a member of an urban search and rescue team. He was involved in coordinating the search for survivors amid the collapsed concrete blocks.
We were asked by the first officer in command to send the USAR team to help him. They were already carrying out a lot of rescue operations with all their resources they had. Incoming resources from the local Liguria stations were incoming. So they were doing a fantastic job. They needed extra help, they needed specialized units, and the units were on the way.
Ho guardato il telefonino,
I looked at my phone and I saw that my sister Nadia had sent a message on the WhatsApp group of the sisters saying, "A bridge collapsed, where are you?" Because Claudia was going to the seaside and was to go by there. We began calling all the numbers, my sisters, my brother-in-laws and my nephew and nieces. My sisters and my brother-in-laws rang free, but my nephew and my nieces were off. And that worried us because it was weird that the phones of a young 12-year-old girl and 16-year-old boy were off.
Perché una ragazzina di 12 anni e un ragazzo di 16 con i telefoni staccati era troppo strano.
Mi è arrivata una telefonata dai...
I received a telephone call from the local police who told me that the Morandi Bridge had fallen down. I asked them what had happened. I thought a piece of sidewall had fallen. They told me that 200 meters of the bridge had fallen. There was no time to give in to panic, although that would be the first reaction. There's no space for public officials to sit back and relax. No.
Adesso rilassiamoci un attimo, no.
A quel punto la domanda, ma tutti ce la siamo fatta.
The question we all asked when they said the bridge collapsed was which bridge? I was under the bridge. It couldn't have been my bridge.
Per me non era il mio ponte.
We said escape, run, the bridge. It was this bridge that collapsed. Monica saw it fall, while on my side was the part that was still standing, the part they had to knock down.
The
collapse of the bridge was a blow to the city, much more than simply losing the bridge. The city was hurt, but rather than bend over and cry, it fought back to rebuild the system even better than it was before.
Marco Bucci is the mayor of Genoa. The Morandi Bridge had always been a symbol of his city. The disaster left its mark on him and on all the citizens of Genoa.
I went into the city hall, and here in the next room, at 12:03, I remember the time exactly, we officially opened the emergency committee meeting. That is the committee that handles an emergency every time there's an emergency. That as the official beginning of the emergency, let's say. The first half hour or 40 minutes, I admit there was panic and we didn't understand what had really happened. Communications were difficult. The mayor has a duty, and this may seem a little cynical, but it is the reality. We need to think about the rest of the city.
Those involved fell off a bridge and fell between 40 and 50 meters. It was a huge drop. So the cars were, or they crashed to the riverbed or on top of other buildings, or were crushed by the huge blocks of concrete, so that was the major cause of death.
Egle Possetti is the sister of Claudia, who died together with her husband Andrea and her children Manuele and Camilla. Egle is the coordinator of the Victims' Families Association. She goes to Genoa with her sister and a friend to find out what happened.
Verso le 11:30.
Around 11:30 p.m. a doctor came to see us. She was a psychologist and she told us that all four had died. My brother-in-law's sister said, "It's all over." And my sister said, "We were too happy." And we went to the hotel where this friend had reserved a room, just to rest a bit, to put our feet up because we were to leave the next morning. Because we hadn't told our parents anything on the phone. Because we couldn't tell them something like this on the phone.
Alzare le gambe perché saremmo ripartiti il mattino dopo, perché i miei genitori al telefono non gli abbiamo detto nulla, perché non potevamo dirgli una cosa del genere al telefono.
The number of victims is confirmed after 5 hellish days for the search and rescue teams. Hundreds of families have to abandon their homes. Italy no longer has access to its main port, and Genoa is cut off from Western Europe.
We started on Tuesday the 14th, and it was Saturday morning when we found the last deceased person, and we were sure, 100% sure, that nobody else was involved in the collapse.
Giusy Moretti is one of the hundreds of people who used to live in the shadow of the bridge.
C'erano le persone che sono andate ad abitare in...
Some people went to acquaintances, others to hotels, others to apartments given by the city. But in the apartments donated by the city, there were no kitchens, so people couldn't cook. So we started a canteen that we kept going till the end of the year, until December, more or less. There were meals coordinated by numbers of people who came during the day and others in the evening.
Fino a dicembre più o meno, e quindi c'erano i pasti da coordinare, il numero di persone, chi veniva al giorno, chi veniva la sera.
Tanto quella notte nessuno ha dormito all'aperto.
First and foremost, nobody was without a roof over their head. Everybody went to hotels. 600 families were evacuated. So you have to imagine how many people we are talking about. Those who lived under the bridge and beside the bridge in the red zone. 6 days later, we handed over the first homes. In 6 days, we started to give the evacuated people a place to live. So that was record time.
Questo è stato un record.
Alessandro, Alizé Plas, Andrea,
A state funeral is held 4 days after the tragedy. But the families and the city will continue to be grief-stricken and in shock for a long time to come. And yet the dust has not settled on the city when the authorities begin planning the reconstruction of one of the most commercially strategic bridges in the nation. The city of Genoa connects Italy to the whole of the Mediterranean and the whole of northwestern Europe, thanks to its two ports. The collapse of the Morandi Bridge not only shocked the nation and killed 43 people, but also blocked road communications across this vital transit infrastructure. It cut Genoa in two and blocked communications with France and the rest of northern Europe. The tragedy is also a financial disaster for the city of Genoa and for the region of Liguria, with its stunning coastline and tourist attractions such as Portofino and Cinque Terre, visited by millions of tourists every year.
At 2:30 we had the first press conference with the journalists, and the atmosphere was very tense. You could cut the tension with a knife. And I said a very important phrase, that Genoa had not been brought to its knees. This is an absolutely vital phrase, because the change in the human mind that comes out of a tragedy and immediately wants to fix things and put things right, change system. Why? Because, like all tragedies, this can become an opportunity for improvement. So from that moment on, we immediately rolled up our sleeves and said, "Come on, guys, here we can do better. Here we can do something big."
The whole area along the Polcevera River, over which the Morandi Bridge once stood, has to be reorganized. The area is occupied not only by homes and by the riverbed, but also by one of the major railway lines into one of Genoa's stations. The Polcevera River is one of three that flow down to the sea through Genoa. The old city was built on top of a small hill overlooking the coastline, but over the centuries expanded east and west, where the main industrial complexes were built. The city of Genoa is boxed in by the sea and the mountains, so the area available to road bridges is limited. The new bridge will have to be built where the old one collapsed. News of the tragedy reached the studio of architect Renzo Piano in Paris. It was a terrible tragedy, and still today I cannot get rid of the impact of that terrible moment of August 14th of last year.
We talked the next day, on the 15th. He called me up straight away, and we exchanged comments about the tragedy of it all. And then I said to him, "Why don't you think about building the bridge?" So he started thinking about it, and then he made this incredible gift to Genoa.
The Morandi Bridge was built in the 1960s. These images from the time show the laying of the concrete. Reinforced concrete, with its steel skeleton, was considered at the time the safest of all construction materials. Time would prove that this was not always the case. The bridge over the Polcevera River was designed so that the thick steel cables held up the road with a fan-shaped support structure attached to massive concrete towers. The support cables were covered in concrete to protect them from corrosion. The bridge was inspected in the 1990s, and the result of the survey was worrying. Water had infiltrated the concrete coverings of the support cables on the easternmost span of the bridge. and had corroded the cables at the joint to the concrete tower. As a result, the easternmost cables were replaced, but in 1999, the motorway system was privatized, and the new company, Autostrade per l'Italia, made no further repairs to the bridge, despite knowing the state of the cables. Essential work on replacing the cables was planned for October 2018, 2 months after the bridge actually collapsed. The Morandi Bridge had become a symbol of the city of Genoa, so much so that the Genoese called it their own Brooklyn Bridge. But little did they know, it was literally rotting from within. This is the story of the rebirth of Genoa after one of the worst infrastructure catastrophes of all time. 2 projects were shortlisted for the bridge. A design by Santiago Calatrava was considered, but eventually, of the 2 finalists, the Renzo Piano design was chosen. That came together as Per Genova. The winning project also involved turning a large swathe of the land under the bridge into an innovative park and green space for the city. The decision-making process was smoothed over and hastened by an unusual collaboration between region and city administrations. Francesco Poma is the project manager of the Per Genova consortium and delivered the dossier.
It was a very busy period between the expression of interest, which I believe was mid-November, when we had to prepare the concept based on architect Renzo Piano's idea in little less than 2 weeks. In the moment in December we knew we'd tendered this work, we immediately put a great team to work to put together an operational plan. A plan to build the bridge that first and foremost had to respect timings, the timings for completion. But it was not the only challenge. We also wanted to raise the level of quality of the work and guarantee the beauty of the project in order to respect the architectural plan of Renzo Piano, who accompanied us through the entire development of the project.
The initial traffic detours to keep the port running were a temporary fix. A new viaduct was built to give trucks from the western port and the airport access to the motorway. The Italian government knew it had to move quickly. By December 2018, bidding was closed on demolition of the old bridge and construction of the new one. Stefano Mosconi is the site manager and was there from day one as the very first foundations for the new piles were laid.
When I arrived in Genoa in January, towards the end of January 2019, when we began working on the design of the new Polcevera Bridge, the old Morandi Bridge wasn't demolished yet, except for the central part that had collapsed. So it was quite shocking to see this great work of engineering wounded, broken in its central spans.
Demolishing the old bridge became a priority, but posed certain problems. While the spans could be cut and slowly lowered using strand jacks, the massive pylons would take months to dismantle. On inspection, the concrete was found to contain natural asbestos, so an explosion was initially ruled out to avoid the dust settling on the surrounding homes. The delay threatened to hinder the reopening of the new bridge for many months. There was a complex but feasible solution. Use water to dampen down the dust. In these images, we see tests of the behavior of massive quantities of water blown into the air, used to calculate the time it would take for that quantity of water to intercept the dust from the explosion. Another complication was the connection of the eastern stays with the mountain. The inertia caused by the explosion threatened a landslide. Once the calculations were carried out, the engineers laid massive basins of water along the bridge, primed with explosives, while smaller charges were placed in the concrete of the eastern stays. The day for the explosion came on the 28th of June 2019. On the 28th of June 2019, 10 months after the deadly collapse of the Morandi Bridge, what was left of the old bridge was spectacularly blown up. The long-standing communities that the bridge had been built over were forced to disperse, adding a new layer of tragedy upon tragedy. For the families of the 43 victims, it was an important milestone.
Io non l'ho guardato. Alcune persone non credo che
I didn't watch it. I don't think that anyone watched it live on television.
Non abbiamo Credo che non abbiamo tutti apprezzato.
I don't think anyone really liked the exaggerated media coverage given to it. We thought it was out of place. Of course, the demolition had to happen so as to build the new bridge. But media coverage was over the top.
Questa demolizione è chiaro che andava fatta perché altrimenti non si poteva costruire quello nuovo. Però, insomma, era troppo mediatico. Troppo.
Io da subito ho detto che non sarei stata qua.
I immediately said that I wouldn't stay here, that I would try to find a place to go with my daughters and my husband. We found an apartment to rent at Celle, so we watched it on TV, all the four of us on the sofa. One of us was away, holding each other's hands. Yes, it had an impact. It was spectacular. But I have to say that I was more impacted by the debris, what was left.
Ha fatto molto effetto, molto scenico, molto... Devo dire che mi ha fatto più effetto poi vedere le macerie, vedere quello che è restato.
Soltanto la demolizione del ponte, quella famosa esplosione.
Just the demolition of the bridge, that famous explosion, was an incredible concentrate of technology applied over milliseconds. No one knows, well, few people know, that the stays which still kept parts of the bridge up were anchored in the hillside and the tunnel. So if we pulled down the bridge, the mountain and the tunnel would come with it. So there was a specific dedicated explosion carried out by the paratroopers of the Kol Moskin battalion that cut the stays milliseconds before the mountains of water rose into the air.
Perché le montagne d'acqua? Perché bisognava eliminare la polvere.
Il 28 giugno è stata una giornata molto importante perché il 28
The 28th of June was a very important date because on the 28th of June, thanks to the use of explosives, the two main pylons of the ex-Morandi bridge were demolished, pylon 10 and 11, and the access ramp to the A7 motorway, with a very delicate and critical operation because it involved a massive structure, huge, 92-meter concrete pylons in the middle of a city, thousands of cubic meters of water, which we mobilized upwards with an explosive charge so it would fall back on the bridge just in time as it exploded, to diminish the dust as it fell at that precise moment.
diminuire le polveri in quel momento preciso.
In the meantime, the engineering of the new bridge continued, and work began on the foundations. Engineer Roberto Carpaneto is the head of RINA, Italy's foremost ship and construction engineering verification company, which was tasked with overseeing the whole project.
In fact, construction began on the 15th of April, so we had parallel work going on at the same time, work that was related to the construction, as well as work that related to the demolition. Managing the safety and scheduling of these phases was a very interesting process.
I am just one member of a team of 1,000 people who are working. Above all, I respect the workers, because building this thing is complicated and difficult. The concept of the bridge was a single beam of steel that stretched all the way from the western to the eastern end of the valley, exactly where the Morandi Bridge had been. The steel structure was to be lifted to the top of the piers in segments that had been assembled on the construction site, and these were then to be welded together once in position to provide a central core that carries most of the weight. While the weight of traffic on either side of the road is dispelled downwards and around the hull-shaped structure towards the core that spreads it along its whole length and onto the reinforced concrete piers and down into the foundation piles. It's a simple bridge, but you see, this word is misused, because when you say simple, people think banal. Everyone knows that simplicity is very difficult to achieve. The bridge is like the hull of a great ship that crosses the valley. And this isn't just a metaphor, because it's being built by a shipbuilding company. The bridge, designed by Renzo Piano, is 1,067 meters long, with 16 spans of 50 meters and 3 spans of 100 meters, resting on 18 elliptical concrete columns. The steel skeleton of the bridge is connected structurally to the outer paneling in steel, shaped to resemble the hull of a ship. The fundamental materials for the new bridge are concrete and steel. Nicola Maestro is the managing director of the Per Genova consortium.
The bridge is just over a kilometre long. There are 18 elliptical piers that are 40 to 45 metres long. We dug 80,000 cubic metres in the area that was very built up, and we used 67,000 cubic metres of concrete, reinforced with 8,000 tons of steel.
The base of each concrete pier consists of 16 reinforced concrete columns that penetrate 50 meters downwards into the terrain and are surrounded by a concrete cube to ensure static stability. Each pier then rises 41 meters upwards in order to hold up the deck that is made of a hull-shaped steel structure that runs the whole length of the bridge, on which a reinforced concrete surface is laid.
We began with Pier 6. The first pile was dug on April 16th of 2019 for Pier 6, and we were on a tiny island of land in the middle of the demolition site of the bridge. It was the absolute minimum space necessary and sufficient to make the first set of piles around the plinth of Pier 6. We cleared the area with a deep excavation, we filled up the hole and made it even with the ground, and then we started to drill the piles down.
The plan was the most ambitious ever, working day and night, 24/7, with just one break for Christmas. Workers and engineers were pulling off an engineering miracle.
While digging to put down the piles, in the last part of the dig, we actually hit bedrock. We had investigated that earlier with a series of probes. We then dug into the bedrock, and these groups of piles were anchored inside the rock, and they were between 10 and 16 per foundation plinth for each of these 18 piers, and obviously for the two end sections. And there were at least 3 of these anchors, and the piles were 1,500 millimeters. So there are between 4.5 meters to 5 each, anchored inside the bedrock of this valley.
Sono nate scelte come l'impiego di attrezzature particolari, l'utilizzo di addirittura 6
Decisions were made to utilize special equipment. For example, we were using 6 machines at the same time to create foundations. 6 climbing formworks to construct the piers. Keep in mind that this is an operation that, aside from the night of Christmas, never stopped. So all the other national holidays were honored, as it were, by working on the construction site. As soon as an area was freed of the rubble of demolition, we had a machine ready there to work 24/7 on the construction of the piles. As I said, we had up to 6 working simultaneously on 18 different sub-foundations. We transferred the same project to the piers, where, following the idea of Renzo Piano, we chose piers that were structurally and aesthetically all the same. So we were able to use identical climbing formworks, so we could move from one pier to the next efficiently.
Ovviamente una volta completata la pila in maniera più utile, più efficace per il progetto.
Le pile sono state realizzate con dei casse
The piers were built using climbing formworks, not self-lifting, but raised using a tower crane. Each pier segment about 4.5 meters high. The lower segments were of variable height. Every 4.5 meter segment had a production cycle of between 42 and 70. 48 and 72 hours. So 2 or 3 days to raise the formwork, reinforce, close, inject the concrete, allow it to harden, and then open it and raise the formwork to the next level.
E poi rimontare al livello successivo.
These are the wooden climbing formworks used to construct each segment of each pier. Once each reinforced concrete segment has been finished, the mold is moved upwards and filled again. This operation is repeated not only dozens of times vertically for every pier, but to save time, also all along the worksite, to provide support for what eventually will be the bridge.
The concrete used in the piers, that is different from the concrete used in the plinths, and different again from the concrete used in the piles, is particularly effective from a mechanical point of view, so strength and class of consistency, but is also technically advanced as far as, let's say, the final aesthetic aspect. Management of the whole production line from the quarry to the laying of the final product is extremely advanced today, and in this case is particularly curated.
The other key material in building the bridge is the steel. This is put together off-site, in the Fincantieri construction sites dotted across Italy. As construction continued after freeing up the valley of rubble from the bridge, victims' families and evacuees protested. The tragedy was not forgotten. Egli Possetti is the coordinator of the Victims' Families Association.
Nessuno deve più provare un dolore così.
No one must ever feel the pain like this. It's senseless. Because we now know, and we have seen from what just came out, that this tragedy was avoidable. It isn't a meteorite, it isn't impossible. It was an avoidable tragedy. So it's an even more painful event because they shouldn't have died that way. If I think of my niece and nephew, 12 and 14 years old, in the fullness of their life.
Poi se io penso ai miei nipoti, 12 anni, 14, poi erano nel pieno della loro vita, non ha nessun senso.
The Victims' Families Association and the Residents' Association continue to demand justice and to protest against the motorway company Autostrade per l'Italia.
We have to act according to law to reach our goals. Our goal is very clear, that the people who caused the disaster pay the price. Today we still hope. If we lost hope, we'd be finished.
Perché se ci abbandonasse questa saremmo finiti.
A committee to defend the rights of the displaced was set up, and the representatives held regular meetings with the city council. Many lost their homes and were compensated, but these were homes that had been built before the Morandi Bridge and handed down for generations. The area was changing forever and a community broken up.
Io in quella casa ci avevo visto nascere
My daughters were born in that house. I was living there when I got married. One of my daughters got married when she was living there. My father died, my mum died there. Great moments, sad moments, all connected to the walls themselves. It's difficult to explain. Both my daughters are psychologists, and they say that we can only speak about it among ourselves. Because however much sympathy you get from other people, only those who actually lived or are living the experience can really understand.
Hanno passato, quelli che stanno passando queste cose possono veramente capire.
50 years later, in order to remove what was left of the bridge, these homes had to be demolished. The owners were compensated, but allowed to take only a few items with them.
Io ad esempio sono andata a cercare.
I went to get mementos. My daughter went to get winter clothing. We went for different... Also because we ran away with what we were wearing. Flip-flops, summer tank tops, summer clothes. So my daughter concentrated on getting clothes and on other stuff. I went to get photographs. Photographs of my daughters as children. Pictures that haven't been saved on a telephone, that I'd never be able to get back. Memories, slices of life.
Ricordi, pezzi di vita.
The new bridge was taking shape all around Italy. Fincantieri moved 24,000 metric tons of steel from 3 production sites: Castellammare di Stabia, Valeggio sul Mincio, and Sestri Ponente, where the spans of the bridge are welded together to form the characteristic hull-shaped base of the roadway. Engineer Ciro Dalzotto managed the construction of the steel spans and their assembly on site.
Every steel panel is in fact made up of 3 sheets that have been welded together, cut and welded together, to make a single large panel of the required dimensions. In the case of the long span of 100 meters, these single sheets of steel are given a curve shape using a large press that gives it that hull shape. The parts built here at the Valleggio works are welded together to create load-bearing elements of the bridge.
Qui a Valleggio vengono posizionate e saldate a formare un elemento di base della struttura portante.
All'interno c'è un'anima, una struttura.
Inside there is a load-carrying metal structure, which means that there is a single beam, with all the sections connected, not separate sections of individual spans resting on the piers. So a single load-bearing beam, a continuous beam, which delivers a very interesting structural answer, which is also innovative as it distributes the load over several spans, not over single spans. The single length of the central beam is obtained thanks to welding, and the different spans of 50 and 100 meters were welded on site, so at height, so quite thick. So we have a single length of bridge, due to the welding of the different sections. The welding followed extremely refined and high-quality requirements. So, obviously, during the construction, any defects were investigated.
Estremamente raffinati, estremamente elevati, quindi è ovvio che durante la costruzione eventuali difetti sono stati tutti investigati.
La scelta progettuale.
The design choice of using steel and concrete and contracting out the steel parts in order to be able to draw on all the Fincantieri workshops around Italy allowed us to prefabricate all these macro elements of the bridge in these workshops at the same time. Then, over time, these elements were shipped to the Genoa port, and using special transports, they were brought to the construction site where, one by one, we allocated special assembly areas on site where the elements could be finished, while the pier was still being built.
E qui gli impalcati venivano preparati mentre magari le pile stavano ancora completando.
Since the bridge is of steel, it maintains the overall shape given to it, but the thickness of the steel depends on the length of the spans. For example, in the 100-meter-long span, the center segment is 40 millimeters thick, and also has a number of strengthening ribs to make it more rigid and interact with the rest perfectly. In the 50-meter-long spans, the sheets are 20 millimeters thick, so we modulate the thickness also, so as not to waste material while keeping the shape constant, giving the design uniformity and linearity.
La forma costante, dando quindi questa uniformità e linearità al progetto.
Steel plinths have been designed into the structure to ensure that they not only fit perfectly, but also absorb the vibrations of traffic.
Ci sono dei dispositivi.
There are special elements, and those are the plinths, specially designed and very wide. They're attached to the pier at the bottom and to the bridge at the top, but they're built so as to allow the bridge to dilate. Remember that the bridge is 1,067 meters long, welded along its entire length, and expands by tens of centimeters with a changing temperature.
Ricordo che appunto il ponte è lungo 1067 metri, è interamente saldato e si allunga di decine di centimetri al variare della temperatura.
The steel structure also has to host a concrete foundation for the tarmac road surface. This stability is provided by thousands of Nelson-type studs or shear bolts that keep the concrete fixed to its bed.
Concrete works through compression, so is ideal for absorbing certain forces, while steel works both under traction and compression. But to ensure the proper interface between these two elements, we use Nelson-type studs. They are welded to the beams in the workshop, and they stop. Let's say they guarantee that these two elements work together in the best possible way.
Questo evidentemente garantiscono la completa collaborazione fra questi due elementi.
È una struttura mista, ovviamente in acciaio calcestruzzo.
In this mixed material design that involves steel concrete, The concrete elements are essentially, let's say, used to resist compression forces, and in the upper part where the bridge might bend, it is under forces of compression, while the steel along the spans in the plinths, where the moment is negative, undergoes traction. And this is where the steel and concrete work together to respond to the stresses. So with a single continuous beam, the structure spreads the loads determined by the traffic that crosses it, not just on each individual pier, but to the piers on either side as well.
I carichi e il traffico che ci passerà sopra non soltanto localmente, ma distribuendola anche alle campate vicine.
One by one, the huge steel decks were transported to Genoa's western port and then carried by night to the worksite by 50-metre-long SPMTs, self-propelled motorized transports, and then positioned between the two piers to be assembled. The size of the steel components made maneuvering the SPMTs around existing buildings difficult, and some buildings along the way had to have hard corners removed to allow the convoys to get around them. Unexpectedly, however, this massive engineering project is about to encounter almost insurmountable obstacles.
We had several critical moments. In October and November, we had the most rainy season of the last 60 years in the Liguria region. So working outdoors, and we were in the process of building the piers, that slowed us down quite a lot. We also had two big floods that infiltrated our construction site, with damage to the construction equipment.
We had a big problem, let's say in autumn, when the construction site was flooded, and then the big problem of heavy seas that stopped the barges bringing materials. That's to say, the steel sheets from Castellammare di Stabia to Genoa. I remember that one of the barges had to take shelter in the lee of Elba for 10 days, for example. So the delay in delivering the pieces led to a delay in construction, and all these delays had to be managed and fixed.
On New Year's Day, there was a fire on Pier 13, on the formwork of Pier 13, due to, let's say, operational inefficiency. And that led to a fire that reached the wooden formwork, and for me, I always say this was the most critical moment. So we had this accident. But here too, this led to a technical reaction, a reaction in operations, because within 20 days of the whole accident, we fixed it, and we started where we left off.
While the fire on New Year's Day burns, on the other side of the world, news of a virus known as SARS-CoV-2, or coronavirus, begins to spread as the disease sweeps through the population of Wuhan in China. Today, we know that COVID-19 was already present in Europe in the autumn of 2019, but only in February 2020 is the very first Italian patient diagnosed with it, leading to the lockdown of 11 towns, including Codogno and Vo Euganeo. On the 19th of February, the Bergamo football team, Atalanta, beats Valencia at the Milan stadium of San Siro, a super-spreader event for the disease. The fans have no idea of the risk they are taking. Hospitals begin to fill up, and within days, the public health service of northern Italy is close to collapse.
Purtroppo tempo non ce n'è. I numeri ci dicono che stiamo avendo una crescita importante dei contagi, delle persone ricoverate in terapia intensiva e subintensiva, e anche, ahimè, delle persone decedute. È per questo che sto per firmare un provvedimento che possiamo sintetizzare con l'espressione "io resto a casa".
On the 9th of March 2020, the Italian Prime Minister announces a national lockdown, excluding essential services. Although the Genoa Bridge is considered a strategic project, new rules are introduced to protect workers' health. The virus takes the life of producer and cameraman Paolo Micai, who shot many of the spectacular images in this film. Italian society as a whole is put under immense pressure, not only by the health crisis, but also economically, just as one of the nation's most ambitious construction projects is reaching its climax.
A marzo è arrivata la pandemia, questa sì, non se l'aspettava nessuno.
In March, the pandemic struck, and this was totally unexpected. It destabilized us for the first 2 weeks. In Italy, the scenario was one that eventually led to a total lockdown, and we were caught up in this problem like the rest of Italy, both directly and indirectly. Directly because we too had difficulty finding the face masks and all the other equipment that today we use on a daily basis to manage this risk. And indirectly because the majority of our workforce came from the most affected regions, Lombardy, Piemonte and Veneto.
Le nostre maestranze arrivavano dalle regioni più colpite, quindi da Piemonte, da Lombardia, dal Veneto.
Già dalla fine di febbraio, prima che ci fosse...
Already from the end of February, before the general lockdown came into force, we had already begun to think of control procedures through DPIs and a review of all our operational procedures, so as to limit the number of workers per team, so as to trace people within the construction site, to work out who had been with whom, so that should anyone have caught the disease, we could easily identify the people to quarantine without stopping the construction.
Senza bloccare il cantiere.
When
COVID started to be a problem, and I followed many other construction sites, the behaviors I witnessed and the determination the workers showed in those difficult and uncertain times, I noticed that the workers had no intention of pulling back. They may have been afraid, but they all went ahead, and I'd like to thank them for that, as it was truly exceptional behavior.
Ma sono andati tutti avanti e quindi vorrei anche ringraziarli perché è stato un qualcosa di eccezionale, insomma.
This was the first construction site in Italy to put together a special protocol for the COVID emergency, not only whereby the temperature of those entering and leaving was checked, always, but we know the day before who will be in contact with whom the next day, so that should anyone be suspended because he has a fever, all the people he was in contact with can be quarantined, because it is known information. This allowed us to have just one positive case that led to the quarantine of 25 people, but a fortnight later, both the sick person and the other 25 people all went back to work.
At first, industry continues to function, while all non-essential businesses are closed. But a week later, the factories close too. The number of new cases, and especially the rising death rates, are worrying. And Italy enters the first national lockdown among European nations. These animations show how, initially, the northwest of the nation, Bergamo in particular, suffers a heavy death toll. But hospitals are filling up in Genoa too. Soon afterwards, other European nations also enter lockdown.
Good evening. Mes chers compatriotes. The coronavirus is the biggest threat this country has faced for decades.
On the 10th of March, 2020, the first 100-meter maxi steel deck is raised. It weighs 2,000 tons. While the other 50-meter spans could be raised with maxi cranes, the giant decks require the use of jack-up systems and strand jacks. The central span over the river is lifted and slowly moved into position with remote-controlled trolleys, called SBMTs, onto a jack-up tower located on an artificial platform of gravel built into the riverbed, before being attached to strand jacks that raise it to the top of the central piers. Raising it is a delicate, precise operation, moving just 5 meters per hour. And silence is key. Operators have to be able to hear every small noise, every adjustment of the deck, as it is slowly, millimeter by millimeter, lifted into position. Construction on the bridge goes forward even as the pandemic is worsening across northern Italy, with ambulances racing through the cities and hospitals filling with patients.
We applied ownership, as you say in English, the skin in the game. Everyone involved has to put their face on the project, as we say in Italy. And that means taking responsibility for decisions. Say things loud and clear. Say things publicly and face the consequences if things don't get done. This is a very driving factor to reach the objective.
What is happening on that construction site is extraordinary. And this often happens on construction sites. Construction sites are places of enthusiasm, of solidarity. Divisions disappear on construction sites. Pride wins through. Pride in doing something all together. While the builders handle the COVID emergency brilliantly, the original tragedy that set in motion the building process remains unresolved. The investigation is getting into full swing. The bridge collapse not only still has no official cause or culprit, but seems not to have brought about a radical change in ownership of the decrepit motorway system.
È chiaro che c'è una responsabilità morale, come dicevo.
Obviously, there's a moral responsibility, as I said, and that the same company continues to make money from the motorways 2 years later makes no sense. There needs to be a very serious change. Citizens have to feel safe in travelling, so there needs to be serious change with regards to who manages the system. And we think it can't be the people who managed it up to today, and above all, who was managing it when the bridge collapsed.
Fino ad oggi e soprattutto che la gestiva nel momento in cui è crollato il ponte.
The builders shine laser lights across the bridge in the colours of the Italian flag, in a sign of solidarity with health workers. The bridge is designed to carry 60,000 vehicles a day and is equipped with over 200 weight and vibration sensors.
The shape of this bridge, aside from the structural benefits, allows it to be completely inspected. We did all the checks and tests, and this bridge will be under constant monitoring, which will allow us to monitor in real time the stresses and fatigue on the bridge, and in this way to certainly be able to plan maintenance in a proactive way, anticipating any problems the bridge itself might have.
Di manutenzione in maniera proactive, diciamo, anticipando le problematiche del ponte stesso.
Down on the worksite, every effort is made to complete the bridge on time, although work is slower and more complicated than before. On the 20th of April 2020, the last steel span is lifted. In an extremely delicate moment for Italy, the bridge represents a resurrection. It is a light in the darkness. Once the last span is in place, the bridge is lit up in the colors of the Italian flag to celebrate success. The new bridge represents a better future, and now, more than ever, construction has to proceed as fast as possible.
Right now, in these days, we are laying the concrete base above the steel structure, and there is approximately 9,000 cubic meters of concrete that form the single base. And then all that is missing is the tarmac, then all the ancillary equipment, the guardrails, before proceeding to the opening. We are almost finished.
The bridge is now visible in all its length, but is still not finished. The roadway still has to be laid. This is built on top of a 4-meter thick layer of concrete that is laid on the steel structure. The tarmac is laid in July, while at the same time the ancillary equipment, such as the glass walls, the solar panels providing power for the sensors, and the 43 lights are installed. Each of these items has been designed and built solely for the new bridge. By the end of July, the bridge is ready for testing. The concrete base of the tarmac road has been laid, and most of the safety infrastructures have been installed. 56 44-ton trucks are driven across the bridge in a spectacular display of confidence. And as they pass, the sensors installed on the bridge send their data on vibrations and pressures back to the control station. The bridge passes the test.
It is a bridge that, despite all of this, it is quite light, because the metal structure allows for a better performance from the point of view of weight capacity compared to a concrete one. It is a lighter bridge, not just at first glance, but also on the scale than the one that was here before. Construction, the technique of project management, the technique of the steel, the piers technique, these are all important and state-of-the-art as far as technology is concerned. But there is also the project management, how you plan a project day by day, because there are always variations. And with these variations, how do we manage them so as to recover time?
In the park below, designed by Milan architect Stefano Boeri, a solemn memorial provides a quiet, restful place for residents to reflect and remember.
Under the new bridge will be a circle of 43 trees. That is a design by architect Boeri. And there are 43 trees, one for each victim. None of them have a name attached so that everyone can see their own relative in any tree. What we see today is temporary, and when the park under the bridge is complete, they will be planted in a circle in the earth. Certainly the monument will include part of the bridge, because we immediately ask for part of the old bridge to be kept, because we don't want anyone to forget what state this infrastructure was in.
Perché noi abbiamo chiesto da subito che qualche pezzo del ponte fosse mantenuto e conservato, perché vogliamo che nessuno si dimentichi come era ridotta questa infrastruttura.
For the mayor of Genoa and head of the Committee for Reconstruction of the Bridge, Marco Bucci, the new bridge has been the highlight of his public career.
A new bridge, built during the COVID pandemic, is the relaunch of an Italy that is able to get things done, that can get it done on time and at cost, and with creativity and intelligence and technology that is typical of our Italian companies, that have so much success abroad, but sometimes aren't able to work in Italy. We want to show this is possible. And this is a practical demonstration of what Italians can do.
We have seen that with just a little bit more care we can build a beautiful infrastructure with an architectural concept, with that added architectural touch that often we engineers don't apply. So I think the collaboration with architect Piano was wonderful, important, and I think we can see the results. With this bridge, with the shape of the hull of a ship, anchored in the valley, a fine sight. Every detail curated, without gutters, a beautiful bridge.
It
was helpful that we could proceed with Article 32, the European bidding process laws, because there's a specific procedure. We didn't ask for exceptions. We followed the law. We followed European law. We needed super controls of anti-mafia and corruption. We did a digital cross-checking of data, and we discovered 2 companies that, according to what they had done, would have been on the whitelist, but we checked on the actual people on the construction site, and we discovered they needed to be eliminated. The bridge cost 202 million plus VAT, and the demolition of the old bridge cost 19 million plus VAT.
I'd like to think that this remains the symbol of a new starting point for our country. I'd like to recall where it all started, with a tragedy, so this can never happen again, and people can realize that Italian companies, with Italian know-how, working in an incredibly short period of time, can fix infrastructure networks in our country, because our country absolutely needs it.
The design of the bridge is symbolic. The hull shape is a clear reference to Genoa's maritime traditions, and the elliptical section of the piers gives it lightness and elegance.
It is a bridge that reflects the character of Genoa. It is a bridge that takes small steps. All these piers, many piers, they are 18 piers. At the beginning, everyone said they were too many, but no. You just have to go and see it today, and it gives you an impression of incredible lightness. The bridge, one step at a time, it reaches its objective. Never overstep the mark, and in the end, you get to where you want to be. Then, it also has the shape of the hull of a ship. The steel bridge is the hull of a ship. Nobody believed it at first, but it's true. You just have to go to see it. It's a ship that is suspended on piers, crossing the Polcevera River, a great sight to see.
It is a miraculous piece of work, and I'd like to say something. This country, that is Italy, which is also my country, even though it is many years that I am abroad, is an extraordinary country that has this capacity, but it's a pity that every time it seems you need an emergency, every time you need a tragedy. Renzo Piano, the architect of the bridge, has never lost sight of the origins of his new creation.
Renzo Piano
was very delicate in what he said, as he is the designer of the bridge. This is his bridge. However, he has always respected the tragedy because we can never forget where this bridge came from a shameful tragedy. So obviously the delicacy with which the architect spoke about the new bridge, also during the opening ceremony, was much appreciated by us all.
È chiaro che la delicatezza con cui l'architetto ha parlato del nuovo ponte anche all'inaugurazione è stata molto apprezzata da noi sempre.
Like many engineering disasters of national significance, the Morandi Bridge catastrophe left a wake of mistrust in the nation's institutions and infrastructures that have not been overhauled since the booming 1990s. Italians began asking just how safe the rest of the nation's aging infrastructure really was. The answer was terrifying. At least 20 motorway bridges in Italy were found to be badly damaged and are now under investigation. On the 11th of November 2020, several top managers of Autostrade per l'Italia were arrested for fraud after emails admitting that the soundproof protections along the motorways were stuck together with glue.
Unfortunately, we have all read what came out in the papers during a parallel investigation to the one on the Morandi Bridge. Words that we family members had already expected, in that we knew deep down that the situation was known. But reading those words in the papers, Morandi Bridge is rotten, spoken a month before the collapse, gives you the shivers.
Dette un mese prima del crollo fanno accapponare la pelle.
Io non riesco a prendere l'autostrada.
I can't take the highway anymore. I'm terrified of any kind of bridge. Then when I read about the false paperwork that came out again, okay, from Genoa, but I think the whole of the highway system is at risk. Unfortunately, that's what you begin to think. It's more than scandalous because, apart from the fact that you have to pay a lot to use the highway, and you also risk your life. Why?
2 more stretches of roadway would dramatically collapse in the months following the Morandi Bridge disaster. A viaduct linking Liguria and Tuscany, as well as a 30-meter section of another aging viaduct on the A6 motorway toward Turin. More than 200 tunnels do not comply with European standards, and there are at least 1,000 viaducts which have not been inspected in years. But even when they are checked, they don't necessarily get repaired.
We expect a strong and clear decision from the political world. And we've said this time and time again. I understand that this could be a risk, but justice has to be our flag. What happened is too serious for things to stay as they are. So the trial and this are 2 determining aspects for us. And of course we'll follow the trial with all the attention necessary.
Il processo e questo sono per noi degli elementi determinanti. E il processo ovviamente lo seguiremo con tutta l'attenzione possibile.
Se il governo dovesse dire all'amministrazione comunale,
If the government were to tell the city administration, you know that we look after all the city roads, except the roads that are owned by the state and are farmed out to others, such as Autostrade. If one day the government were to come and tell us that they are giving the bridge and Genoa's motorway to the city, we are ready to manage them.
siamo pronti per gestirle.
Whatever or whoever was responsible for the deaths of 43 people under the rubble of the Morandi Bridge remains to be determined by the courts in legal and criminal proceedings that are likely to drag on for decades.
Perché ci vuole il disastro? Perché ci vuole l'emergenza?
Why do we need a disaster? Why do we need an emergency? This bridge was built by Italians, by Italian companies, very capable, and it is extraordinary. There are incredible things in this bridge that I didn't do, or at most I contributed to them. There are the robots that continually monitor the state of the bridge. There is very advanced technology in the construction and maintenance, and in the promise that it can last and be loved for 1,000 years. These things are things that our country knows how to do.
Queste cose qui sono cose che il nostro paese sa fare.
On the 3rd of August 2020, the new bridge is officially opened in the presence of Italy's top political and religious leaders. It has rained all day. and the thousands of Genoese who have gathered in the streets and hills overlooking the bridge are drenched as the inauguration ceremony begins. But then, as the names of the 43 victims of the Morandi Bridge disaster are called out one by one, the clouds part and 2 rainbows appear in the sky. It is a mystic, emotional moment for the Genoese people, a sign of hope after months of despair.
This idea of a ship sailing silently over the site, almost watching over it, where so many people died, is a beautiful image, maybe the most beautiful.
Quella è un'immagine proprio, secondo me, bellissima ed è la cosa forse più bella.
The Italian Air Force's aerobatic display team fly in to celebrate the historic day, a day to celebrate Italians' fortitude, not only that they could recover successfully from the pandemic that has gripped them for so many months, but also to show that the nation can come together quickly to rebuild something grand from the ashes of a tragic disaster.
I was very moved by the words of Renzo Piano, who is the father of this bridge. When he was sure this bridge would be loved and needs to be loved by the Genoese and all those who cross it.
Per crescere anche, insomma, di essere amato dai genovesi e da tutti quelli che lo attraverseranno.
It is a time for celebration, and it seems that Italy has turned a corner. But lingering questions about judicial and criminal responsibility are still unanswered. And the controversial ownership of the bridge and management of the whole motorway system by Autostrade per l'Italia is still an open wound. Ironically, the murky business of seeking truth and justice for the victims will prove a longer and more difficult task than building a replacement bridge. But the welcome scene of cars and trucks once again speeding over the Polcevera Valley is a sign that the battered city can be resurrected. The iconic new bridge is not just a symbol of national resilience, but also a tribute to the victims by turning tragedy into triumph.